A chance to close it out. The stars are out for the Bucks, and the Pacers fall flat in their face. 92 points, a big loss. It's a 3-2 series. A very uninspiring performance. What went wrong for the Pacers in Milwaukee? Can they regain? What adjustments changed the series? We'll get to it all today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, y'all? Happy Wednesday, and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today we're talking Game 5 of Pacers Bucks. Oof. I always start with oof when the Pacers play bad, and I might need to do 2 oofs, 3 oofs, a different something, a thudding noise. I don't know. I don't know what noise is appropriate, because that was a stinker for the Pacers, who scored 92, which is their worst offensive game of the season, regular season included. They had 94 in Game 1, which is their previous low. They looked terrible on offense, which is stunning, not only because it happened. They had 3 previous solid games on the offensive end. They scored 31 points the first quarter. They had a 10-point lead in the first 12 minutes, and some of that was hot shooting, but they looked okay, had it like enough energy to look like they were going to be threatening. They didn't shoot that bad from 3 in this game, but they could not get going at all. And it cost them in a big way. They are now only up 3-2. The chance of the star returns for Milwaukee increases by the day. Yes, the series shifts back to Indy, but a missed opportunity. I always feel stupid to ask players that, but Myles Turner said it. Yes, it was a missed opportunity, even though, again, he rolled his eyes. He knew it was a silly question. Of course it was a missed opportunity. They had a chance to close it out, and they didn't. We'll get to everything that went wrong today on this show. The offense is where we'll start, because to me, that's the story of the game among many things. A lot of people with questions about the rotation. I'll talk about it because I have different thoughts than everyone, even though, yes, obviously the rotation results-wise leads to a ton of questions, and even process-wise has some questions. What did the Bucks do differently that actually change things up, and how can the Pacers combat it going forward? What does this mean for the series? All sorts of stuff. Because oof, that should just be the title of this episode. Pacers lose. Final score was 92-115. 115 actually is a little bit striking of a number if you've been keeping up with this series. The Bucks in regulation, 108, 109, 111, 113, and now 115. They keep getting a little higher on that end of the floor, but the Pacers offense has been good enough after Game 1 to combat it. Of course, Game 3 went to overtime, but they had 111 at the end of regulation. Today, their highest number yet. So Pacers bad on both ends. Their offense is the story of this game to me, though. 92 points for the Indiana Pacers is stunning to see, even more stunning if you watched the game or had any feel for it, because early the Pacers looked fantastic. And I know that they didn't think they had good energy, and I think that's true. From the second quarter on, they had terrible energy. And I think that a lot of this was hot shooting to start the game. But when they went up, I forget exactly what it was. I think it was 31-21 was their 10-point lead. Doug McDermott hit a 3 with 2 minutes to go in the first quarter. Things were looking good, and this is important for later. The bench was playing well late in the first quarter. Obi Toppin hitting free throws, Ben Shepherd hitting threes, Doug McDermott hitting threes. Right, they were getting good production from their second unit at that time, which was significant, given how previous games have gone. They've used McDermott as the zone buster, right? They've done all sorts of stuff. So early, they looked really good on the offensive end, and for the rest of the game, they looked awful. So, for example, the number I used earlier, I said they didn't shoot that bad from 3. 12 for 38 was the Pacers' final number. That's 31.6%. That's pretty bad. But that's better than 2 other games in this series. But in the first quarter, they were 7 for 13. Shepherd made 2, Haliburton made 2, McDermott made 1. They were getting contributions from everybody. So if you remove that 7 for 13, the Pacers were 5 for 25, which is 20% across the last 3 quarters, and their attempts clearly were way down. So they did a much better job early of generating threes than they did for the rest of the game. That was problem number 1. Their hot shooting masked a lot of really crummy play early in the game. Thing 2 that happened in this game, the Pacers scored 42 points in the paint total. If you listen to the show all season, if you listen to the show even during the postseason at times, I talk a lot about the Pacers play in the paint. Paint to great is what they say, is what they call it. When they get in there, they look at their best. People were tweeting at me during the game about this. Like Haliburton couldn't get in there as much as he normally does. 10 of his 14 shots were threes, and he was making them. He made 4 of them, but he couldn't get in there as much, right? The Bucks defense was doing well to wall that off. They were switching more. We'll talk more about that later. But that was a big problem for the Pacers as well. They didn't hit the offensive glass as hard as they have in other games, and the Bucks had more offensive rebounds in this game. I think this is the accurate. Game 1 might also be the case. The Pacers had more turnovers than the Bucks, 12-10. Only 13 free throw attempts for the Pacers, and they struggled mightily from their Siakam, especially with 4 of the Pacers' 5 misses. So many things went wrong for the Pacers on offense in this game that have not gone wrong throughout the series. They missed the threes. Their energy wasn't there. They couldn't get into the paint. But the key part of this is a big adjustment the Bucks made that really came to fruition in the second quarter. I don't know the first time this lineup was on the floor. I'll try to figure it out while I'm talking. It's not extremely relevant, the exact moment that it started being a thing. Okay, Danilo Gallinari came in with 2 minutes and 41 seconds to go in the first quarter. McDermott hit a 3 right after that to give the Pacers a 10-point lead, and the Pacers were up 8 after the first quarter. And then in the early second quarter, the Bucks just slowly but surely kept cutting into it, and they tied the game, took the lead about 4 minutes in the second quarter. Never gave it back. Just completely dominated the rest of the way after they took the lead for the first time. Why is Gallinari an important thing? Because if you listen to my post-game podcast after Game 4, I actually roasted the Bucks for needing to play him. He was very slow. TJ McConnell was crushing him because he could actually get to the basket against that group, right? He wasn't as effective deep in that zone. He hit 3 shots, but he couldn't do a whole lot. In this game, Gallinari didn't hit any shots. He hit 1 shot, and yet he was plus 15 in 20 minutes. Because when he was out there, he played with Bobby Portis, and that was not possible in Game 4, obviously, because Bobby Portis got ejected 7 minutes into the game. That's why they originally had to play Gallo in the first place. Going back to Gallo in this game was interesting because, of course, Portis was in the rotation, but the Bucks went away from their young guys. AJ Green only 5 minutes, Andre Jackson only 7 minutes. They went to vets. They basically played a 7-man rotation of all vets, and their plan was really interesting. So why Gallo matters is when he was in there with Portis, and this ended up becoming a thing for the rest of the game, the Bucks could switch way more than they have all season, right? Especially Patrick Beverley's a good defender, and Beverley was plus 36. Ridiculous Patrick Beverley game in terms of impact. But like when they go Beasley, Middleton, Portis, Lopez, Connaughton, Gallinari as their rotation, and then Beverly's a guard in there, they can switch a lot. That's a lot of like-sized guys. It's not a lot of young guys who are going to mess up switches or not be ready for those situations. And so they were switching so much, way more than any other game. It was very obvious. It was one of the first things that went into my notes for this game, and it really threw off the Pacers' funk, right? That was the first thing that kept the Pacers out of the lane is these switches. They weren't quite ready to flow into their next action. They weren't sure where the mismatches were going to be. There were a couple times where Gallinari was on Siakam in the post, and I put in my notes, they've got to get it down there to Pascal Siakam if that's going to be the matchup, but they couldn't pull it off. And then Siakam didn't even have the same impact on those post-ups. He was 5 for 12 when they threw it in there. He missed some threes. That should be a natural mismatch for the Pacers, but it wasn't for a lot of the game. And some of that's on Siakam, and some of that's credit to Gallinari. But credit to the Bucks for getting to that switching defense that really threw things off for the Pacers. So the second half starts, and then to continue down that path of interesting changes and switches the Bucks did, they put Brook Lopez on Aaron Nesmith, and then Chris Middleton on Myles Turner, which has been fascinating because, again, if you've been listening, watching, whatever, this whole series to keep up with it, a key thing for the Pacers is the first 4 games of the series, Brook Lopez's man, not at the fault of Brook Lopez, at the fault of the Bucks in general team and scheme, Brook Lopez's man was feasting, right? Siakam with the first 2 games, Myles Turner in game 3 and 4. This time that didn't happen. No dominant front court presence for the Pacers, right? Their highest score in the game was Haliburton with 16. Turner and Siakam combined for 25 in games 1 through 4. One of those 2 alone had more than 25. So the Bucks changed that up, and Nesmith couldn't quite punish it. They needed to find a way to get him more involved, maybe as a screener and some other way. He had foul trouble too, but Nesmith was 3 for 9 with 7 points. And so the Middleton part of it is if they're just going to switch everything, if the big man he's on, which was Myles Turner, sets a screen, that's a switch. And so The Bucks were doing well to get Patrick Beverley out of those plays. He wasn't even always in there when they were doing that. Like, the Bucks did really well to make that defensive scheme productive and disruptive, and it kept the Pacers out of the paint, and it kept the Pacers from getting into any rhythm, and it prevented the Pacers from getting into any of their second actions. It never felt like once they went to their first thing, they could get into anything else, which is generally a sign of the Pacers just being out of sync and poor. And that lasted for the whole game. So my synopsis of what went wrong for the Pacers on offense is, one, they stopped making threes after the first quarter, and they had some good looks in the second quarter. It felt like as the game went on, maybe this is just because it felt like they couldn't do anything, but it felt like those looks got worse in general. Second thing that happened is the Bucks started switching a lot more with their veteran-filled rotation instead of the young guys. The young guys seemed like they were going to be the Bucks' answer for a little bit. They went away from that and started switching more. Pacers need to figure out answers to that. Some of that is just getting into more screening actions, force mismatches to happen that force the Bucks to react, right? If a small is on a big, get that big ball in the post. When the double comes, swing it around, make the extra pass, do something behind the play. All that stuff is valuable, and the Pacers have done that before, right? We've seen them do well against switching defenses. Defenses with size that can switch have been their kryptonite, and that's why Patrick Beverley having such a big impact was fascinating to me, because the rest of the Bucks do have some size to be fascinating. Bobby Portis in particular was special because he can kind of toggle between the 4 and 5, and he fits a lot of that billing. And the third thing the Bucks did, they switched the Brook Lopez matchup in a way that really threw off the Pacers' funk, and all that together led to 92 points for the Indiana Pacers, who lose for the second time of the series. It's now 3-2. They have 2 more chances to win once. Thursday is their next one in Indy, and they will have to play better on offense, and they'll have to do a lot of other stuff better. Let's talk about the rotation, their defense, some individual performances, other stuff that the Pacers need to do better heading into game 2. Before we get to any of that, though, let's very quickly talk about 2 wonderful groups of people. First up, the good folks over at DoorDash. Moms are a gift, so give your mom the bestest Mother's Day gifts as thoughtful as she is with DoorDash. Select from hundreds of expertly crafted bouquets to the best of tech to self-care essentials and more, delivered right to her door. If your mom has a sweet tooth, or she's a tech enthusiast or a beauty connoisseur, that's my mom, or she's outdoorsy, no matter what she's into, you can make her smile with a fruit or flower bouquet or makeup or tech gear or workout wear and more, and they can be delivered on the same day with DoorDash. Like if she's a bookworm, or you can get her a bookstore card or a good latte, all this stuff can be delivered to her door. You can schedule it a week ahead with DoorDash. Shop with savings that would make your mom proud with a Dash Pass membership. You'll save with a $0 delivery fee and reduced service fees. Get your Mother's Day gifts all in one place and get 50% off your next order up to $15 when you spend $15+ on your next flower, convenience, grocery, or retail order now with the code LOCKEDONNBA on DoorDash. That's LOCKEDONNBA. Order using DoorDash today. Let's also talk about FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and the NHL, best time of the year. And FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150. That's a lot in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet when you get started. That's $150 to bet on your faves, player props, money lines, spreads, whatever you like, they've got it, and plenty more on the FanDuel app. So you visit FanDuel.com/lockedon, make every playoff shot count, and win $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Back here on Locked On Pacers, thanks for making us your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, check out Locked On Bucks. Hear what they're saying about a season-saving maybe win. They might get their starts back. We'll see. Doc Rivers seemed hopeful after Game 6 here in Milwaukee. I apologize for 2 things if you're watching or listening to this. One, if you can hear this fan above me, I've had my AC turned off in my hotel room for a long time. It will not turn off. I have no idea why. It turned on magically, too. It's not doing anything. The temperature is the same as when I got in here. 2, the background is not the Fiserv Forum court I wanted it to be. I was in the building. They were doing something on the court after the game. Lots of wires and tape. Don't go here. Don't go there. I'll just go back. And now, instead, I get this loud fan. Perhaps a fitting summary of the Pacers' night, things going wrong. So, a lot of buzz about this. I actually thought the rotation stuff was way less problematic than it was in Game 1 when people had a lot of questions about it. But there were a lot of questions about it. So let's talk about it. The first gripe a lot of people had with what the Pacers did rotationally was in the first half. They went deep into their bench. Doug McDermott played again, and he has played in the same situation in the last 2 games. It worked well in game 4. It was not as effective, -3 in 5 minutes in this game. When the Pacers go to McConnell and the Bucks went zone, they bring in McDermott to be a shooter against those groups. He hit a 3 again. And so the first half rotation thing that people were confused about was leaving the bench in too long. Okay. That is so reactive. Now, I agree with, first of all, let me be clear. I agree with that. It wasn't for too long. That did happen. That is very based on the result of what happened in the first half, right? Because the bench came in at the end of the first quarter and was good, right? Toppin and Shepard came in with 6.5 minutes to go. The Pacers were up 2 points when those 2 guys came into the game. They were up 2. And they were both really good. McDermott came in, and the Pacers were up 8. They went up 10 like a minute later. The bench was doing really well. Nembhard came in after the Bucks cut it to 8, and then the first quarter ends. So that group got it, some mixing and matching, and some of it being full bench plus a guard from 2 to 10, and then it was 8. And so they started the second quarter, and they chipped into it, and then Nesmith came in, and they were still up. Right? Like starters came back in the starters came back in, they were still ahead. It was 8:45 to go in the second quarter. So if you think that 3 minutes to start the second quarter was too long, I do. I don't know when the perfect time was, but when Nesmith came in, and he came out early, he was one of the guys who came out for Shepard. He was in foul trouble, but maybe they should have brought in starters earlier when it was a 6-point game at like 33-27 instead of waiting that extra minute and a half. But it wasn't that long. It was just such a fast run that it happened. And then the starters continued to bleed the points. So it's not like the rotation was the problem. The Pacers were just playing really bad. Again, though, I agree that it got out of hand so fast that maybe you want to make the changes quicker, but the bench was good at the first quarter, especially. McDermott, it's just really tough with his defensive limitations. Like, he's got to make the threes when he's in there. He made a 3 in this game. He made a 3 in game 4. So he's at 50% the last 2 games, and he's still only a +1 in those minutes, right? It's just tricky, and I get why they're doing it, but then the Bucks went man-to-man to start the second quarter, and they couldn't afford to have him out there anymore. I think that's why he got pulled so quickly at the time, right? Because if he's not busting up his own and forcing the Bucks to, spread out as much, it's not as valuable in those settings. I don't even think he was I can't remember if he was in to start the second quarter or not. I think he might have been out already. Either way, not an effective stretch. That was the rotation part that at least I understood it, right? Even though I get what people are saying about that group coming out sooner. The second half one was really puzzling. So the second half one, everybody's talking about. This one, definitely more questions about. I asked about this one after the game. I'll get to the explanation as we get through this and talk about it. So Pacers were down at halftime. They were down 6, I believe. I'm going to double check my math on that. Yes, they were down 6. It was 53-48. That's 5, Tony. There we go. They were down 5 at halftime. They had a terrible second quarter. They only scored 17 points. And the third quarter starts, and the starters stunk. The lead dropped to, it was up to 12, like right away. I think it got as high as 15, 14 early in the third quarter. And then the starters did a little better. It was 64-50 with 9 minutes to go. And then with 6:46 to go, it was a 9-point game. Nembhard just scored. Shepard hit a free throw. Haliburton got to the basket, right? So they got to the rim in those moments. And then with 6:45 to go, Obi Toppin came in for Andrew Nembhard, and TJ McConnell came in for Myles Turner. Now, if you were listening, when I was talking about the first half subs, the first 2 subs were Toppin and Shepard coming in. That happened with 6:24 to go in the first quarter. So we're about the same time that subs happen, and it's about the time that Obi Toppin comes in, but McConnell was different. And also Isaiah Jackson came in for Pascal Siakam. So the lineup on the floor at the time was TJ McConnell, Ben Shepard, Tyrese Haliburton, Obi Toppin, and Isaiah Jackson. And everybody was instantly like, huh? What is going on with this? So here, let's talk about the potential whys and why this was confusing. And it did not work. People are too low on what happened. But anyway, so Caitlin Cooper was all over this in the first half. So with the Bucks doing all the switching, and they were going smaller, right? Gallinari, Bobby Portis minutes, talked about that in the first segment. Here's her full tweet. I'll just read it. She said, the Bucks are going to look at more of the Gallo-Bobby minutes. They will also likely continue to switch. The Pacers may need to consider going back to a rim protector against the small ball. Also needs to be more intentional matching the switches. So that is good logic to me. That makes sense. If they're going to go small, they're not going to be able to do as well around the rim. You can get away with the center. You can get more rebounds. Isaiah Jackson fits that billing well. the thought of that is sound. Isaiah Jackson comes in the game. But when he came in, they were not at small ball. Brook Lopez was in the game still for the Bucks. And immediately Brook Lopez gets fouled by Isaiah Jackson 34 seconds after he came in, and he hit 2 free throws, right? And Brook Lopez hit a floater like 40 seconds after that. So the lead went from 9 to 13 like that. And so that was very perplexing. It actually went from 9 to 15 because it was a 6-0 Bucks run in a minute and 20 seconds after that group subbed. So instantly everyone's like, why did they do that? That was so confusing. So the reasoning to that part makes sense. And then after that 6-0 Bucks run, Gallo does come in the game. This is what this small ball group's in for. And so at the time, it's 72-57. Well, guess what? The Pacers scored, and then they scored again, and then they scored again, and they cut it to 13. And then the Pacers subbed Siakam in for Isaiah Jackson, and they were down 13 at the time. And by the time the quarter ended, their lead got to 20. So again, the end of the end of the third quarter, people said, oh my gosh, the Pacers were down 9. They made these stupid subs. And by the end of the quarter, they were down by 20. Well, the stupid subs, they did not work. That group did not work. They gave up 6 points in a minute and 20 seconds. It didn't work. The reason they were down 20 is because the last 2 minutes after they brought back in Siakam for the weird group and went back to a normal group, Nembhard was in, Nesmith was in, Siakam was in, Shepherd was in, and Toppin was in. That was the group to close the third quarter. That's a good group. That group makes sense. No one's crapping on that group. They got smoked. They got absolutely smoked for the last 3 minutes of the quarter. That is where it really turned and where the game got totally out of hand. So the momentum's a factor here. All right. And strategy is a factor here. And that group did not work. And the first and the early second quarter group did not work. They were not effective. They were in for 3 minutes and they weren't effective. And that third quarter group did not work either. I think both of those are being scapegoated for bigger problems. They were both bad. I am not saying that Rick Carlisle made the right choice. They were both clearly not correct. But I think that the Pacers were playing so bad on both ends of the floor that they were looking for answers with that group in the second half, and it was the wrong answer. It was the wrong gamble. That's a negative. That is a criticism, to be clear. But that's what I think about that. I asked Rick Carlisle about it after the game. I said, you went to Isaiah Jackson in the third quarter. You were mixing and matching with the 3-guard group in there. You did not do that. It was Haliburton, McConnell, and Shepherd. You had not done that before. Why? Why? He said, was it offense, energy? He said they were looking for energy. And it didn't work. It did not work. That's a risk. It didn't work. And you deserve criticism for when that happens. That's the whole point of, taking risks. But I think that it was a little reactionary to the fact that the Pacers just played really bad, regardless of who was on the floor for much of the game. But that one was really stunning to me. Like, again, I got the rationale for it because we'd never seen it before, hardly ever, especially in a playoff setting. So I guess you can hope that it pops if you're the Pacers and gives you the energy you need. Like, it is a lot of speed against an old Bucks team, but it didn't work. The bench was really bad. If you listen to me talk to Justin Garcia yesterday, I said I think the bench could be a factor at some point. 3 for 7 for Toppin, 3 for 10 for McConnell, who has had a rough series. That's a big factor. Is Pacers did not play well in this game on either end. Yes, those rotation decisions were wrong. They deserve to be criticized. That's why I asked about them after the game. I think they are a small scapegoat for bigger Pacers problems because starting groups also stunk it up worse than those groups did in both halves of the game. But again, they were bad. I understand. We have to talk about them. Pacers defense wasn't very good either. And what can they adjust to actually win Game 6 and close things out, especially if Bucks stars are playing? We'll talk about all that to close out today's show. But not until I tell you guys more about Monopoly Go. We got to pause here and talk more about it. I know what you're saying, Tony. I've already talked about the game. You've talked about it a lot, but there's so much good stuff on it that I'm going to keep telling you about it. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for timed tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much to get. Unique stickers that you can trade with friends to complete albums for huge prizes. Cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with. Hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings and heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own mini games like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine. There's always timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So go get off the bench and download it free on the Google Play or App Store. Game on. And we're back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making us your first listen today and every single day for your second listen. Locked On Knicks or Locked On Sixers. That series is incredible. It also is going to Game 6, which means that the Pacers do win either of the last two games. They will not start their second round series, should they make it, until next Monday. That's now clinched for sure after everything that happened. Pacers Bucks Game 6 is Thursday. If you haven't heard yet, it is at 6:30 Eastern Time on TNT in Gainbridge Fieldhouse. You know we'll be there for more coverage of this series. Okay, so there's so much more to get to from this game. Pacers defense wasn't good either, and this was the Bucks. Good shooting game for the Bucks. 38% from deep. Malik Beasley hot again. Chris Middleton hot as usual. He's been dominant all series. That was a big swing. They have not shot particularly well in this series. They also were great at getting to the line without having Dame, and they scored well in the paint, or at least were playing well in the paint. This is the second game in a row where the Bucks have impressed me with their floater range finishing. They've been really hot from like outside the restricted area, but still in the paint or at the elbows. That's been really a big swing in this. And that's a hard shot to defend, especially in a playoff setting, because you want to cut off the rim. You don't want to give up open threes. So it's hard to close out in a way that lets you prevent both of those things if you're in rotation or whatever. Now, a lot of them can be symptomatic of like you're getting blown by, but if teams are hitting floaters all night, and the Bucks they shot over 50%, well over 50% from two. That's tough. So the Pacers defense was just not very good. They did not force the Bucks into as many turnovers. They couldn't keep them off the foul line. The threes were falling. The rebounding was bad. It was all rough, and it tied into their bad shooting itself. Like often these things blend together, but the Pacers' poor offense was leading to their bad defense. They had to play in transition so much that the Bucks could get out and kind of run in ways that they can't always do, which was really impressive. Bucks won the fast break points battle. They had over double what the Pacers had in this game, which is extremely unusual and uncommon. And so that's another way that the Bucks got this going. They got in gear with their vets, which surprised me. But when your backs are against the wall and you're playing at home, that kind of stuff can happen. So the worst Pacers defensive game of the season, I think that's largely tied to how bad they played on offense, though, more than anything. If they made the Bucks take the ball out of the net a little bit more often, they still would have lost, but it would have been closer to like 100 to 108 or something than this final score. And then we're talking about this game a little differently, but in total, they played their worst offensive and defensive game, at least numerically, of the series at the same time. That won't work. That is how you lose. So 23-point loss for the Pacers. They couldn't shoot. They couldn't stop the Bucks. They couldn't get to the line. They turned it over. They lost on the glass. Everything needs to be sharper and better going into Game 6. Look, I understand every time since Game 1. I did not understand going 11 deep in Game 1. I talked about it. I asked Rick about it. I asked about the rotations. I just talked about my opinions on that stuff. They just should play the 8. It should just be the starters plus Toppin, Shepard, McConnell. And honestly, I don't know how, because clearly Haliburton with the back thing, his 2 lowest minute games have been since this popped up. But if they can't play him a ton, it's like that this changes this. But McConnell hasn't been good enough to the point that you almost have to think about not eliminating, because they need the ball handling with Mathurin out, but reducing his minutes some. 3 for 10 in this game, 3 assists, 2 turnovers. Like, he has not had a game where it felt anything like what he was doing late in the regular season. The Bucks just go zone. The second he's in there, it's harder for him to kind of probe into those spots. You could surround him with as much shooting as you want if you're the Pacers. They're trying, right? They're trying. Toppin, Shepard, McDermott, and a big. Like, it's usually not like a backup center. It's usually Pascal, Siakam, or Myles Turner, right? That is, in theory, what you'd want around McConnell to make him probe and succeed against his zone, but they haven't been working that well, right? So finding creative answers to that would be something the Pacers should hope to find in the coming days, because I think they need to just go back to plan 8. Maybe you can sneak those McDermott minutes in against the zone possessions if they do it. But if they don't do it, they didn't do it early in the second quarter with McDermott on the floor, then you can't get away with that as the Pacers at all. So I think the 8 is the move. That they won 2 games with that. It clearly proved to work. Again, I get why they won Game 4 going away from it a little bit, but it's the playoffs, and you got to tighten things up for your final games. And they got smoked. They had garbage time in this game, but no one hit even 34 minutes for the Pacers, while the Bucks had 2 guys at 39 and 1 at 36 in this game. So that's not even an adjustment. That's just how the playoffs work. I think you'll see the Pacers really tighten that up in Game 6. They got to figure out that switching defense. Again, switching defenses on their own have not been problematic for the Pacers. It's when it gets them, Tyrese Haliburton kind of talked about this after the game, like when it really gets them stagnant to the point that, they're not attacking and they hold the ball because they get a switch and they have to think or assess where a mismatch is. They're not playing their way when they do that. And I get why they want to do that. It makes them think, I'm making the right play. I'm swinging it to a guy with the mismatch, or I'm keeping the ball moving, whatever. That's noble, but that's not what they need to be doing. They need to just keep playing, keep doing their random action stuff, keep trying to generate a good shot, and naturally find those mismatches they can then attack. That's a key adjustment too. Don't get so bogged down by the switching. Keep playing their way, make it happen. And if the stars play for the Bucks, that's going to be really interesting, because that's going to change the dynamic of everything. If Dame can come back, if Giannis can come back, then this becomes a lot more difficult for the Pacers for a number of reasons. Perhaps not 100%. Pacers beat Giannis a lot this season. Pacers beat Dame in this series. It doesn't mean anything about their chances of winning to me, at least in one game. But how that shakes out will be fascinating. That's just on the fly adjustments. You got to be ready for what you've been planning for. You got to be willing to change stuff. You got to be willing to see what they're doing and react quickly. These are elimination games. And that's why this felt like such a missed opportunity. Those guys weren't playing. Pacers were up 10 in the first quarter and just completely stunk it up for the final 3 quarters of this game. From the end of the first quarter to the end of the night, the Pacers only scored 51 points. I mean, that's just crazy. The Bucks, meanwhile, scored 90 in that stretch. I might be doing some crappy math. Yes, that should not be 90. That should be 92. 51-92 after the first quarter. That still also seems wrong. I don't know what's going on. My brain is mush. It's so late. The game started late. I'm in a different time zone. That's a good place to end it. What will happen in game 6? We'll talk about that tomorrow. It'll just be me, most likely. Fever Media Day on Wednesday. So not a ton of time to get in with the guests. We'll talk adjustments, the keys to the game, the health status of Giannis and Dame, other stuff I'll be watching for from an adjustment perspective, because I have plenty of notes I didn't even get to from this game. But the Pacers now up 3-2, 2 more chances to get that critical 4th win to move on to the second round. We'll have all the coverage of this series and what the Pacers do next here on the Locked On Pacers podcast. You can find me on Twitter at Tony Tyrese and all my work there as well from throughout the series, and the show's there at Locked On Pacers. Hope everybody has a wonderful Wednesday. See y'all tomorrow talking game 6. Till then, everybody have a wonderful day.